Lena Ward knew the smell of dust. It was the smell of Messilia, the smell of her small, shadowed sewing room, and the smell of the grave where her husband, Elias, lay. But this dust, the dust inside the supply wagon, was different. It smelled of raw flour, axle grease, and the sharp, terrifying scent of escape. She had been huddled under the stiff canvas for 2 days, her body aching with every jolt of the iron-rimmed wheels. She was in her late 20s, but in the stale darkness, she felt ancient. Her red hair, usually pinned up tight and neat, was a loose tangle of grit and sweat against her pale skin. She had left Messilia with nothing but the clothes she wore, a small bundle of cash stitched into her chemise, and the lingering echo of Deputy Marshal Joel Brandt's voice. Brandt, the name was a sickness in her stomach. He was a man who collected things. He had collected Elias, locking him up on a charge of cheating at cards, a charge that never saw a courtroom. Elias was a gambler. It was true, but he was not a cheat. It did not matter. Brandt held the keys, and 2 days later, a mob held the rope. Lena had been a widow for 6 months. In that time, Brandt's visits had changed. At first, they were offers of condolence, his eyes too sharp, his smile too slick. Then they became offers of protection. This is a hard territory for a woman alone. Lena, he'd said, his thumb brushing the brim of his hat as he stood in her parlor. A woman needs a man to look after her, to own her affairs. He wanted her shop, the small adobe house that Elias had won and lost and won again. He wanted her. When she had refused his final, blunt proposal, his face had not changed, but the air in the room had turned to ice. I find it best when things are legal and tidy. Lena, he'd said, his voice soft. Elias, he wasn't tidy, and I recall there was some inquiry, a question of your own part in his assault on an officer. You defended him, I believe, hindered my investigation. It was a lie, a threat woven from his own authority. He would not have her, so he would ruin her. He would use the law to seize her, just as he had seized her husband. She had seen the notice he was preparing, a warrant that named her. She had seen it on his desk when she'd gone to deliver his mended shirt, her hands shaking so badly she'd almost dropped it. That night, she had fled. She'd given a freight driver, a kind man named Hatcher, half her hidden money to hide her in his wagon heading north to Santa Fe. The wagon lurched to a sudden, violent stop. Lena froze, her heart climbing into her throat. She heard Mr. Hatcher shout, a questioning, nervous sound. It was answered by a different kind of shout, a language she did not understand, followed by the dry, terrible crack of a rifle. More shouting. The canvas ripped open, and sunlight flooded in, blinding her. She screamed as a rough hand grabbed her arm, dragging her out onto the hard-packed dirt. They were raiders, their faces painted, their eyes hard. Mr. Hatcher lay by the wagon wheel, his eyes open to the sky, a dark stain spreading across his chest. One of the men grabbed the front of her dress. Lena reacted without thought, her nails raking across his face. He howled and struck her, a heavy blow to the side of her head that sent her sprawling into the alkali dust. The world spun into a dizzying white heat. She heard them ransacking the wagon, the sound of flour sacks splitting open, tins of coffee being tossed aside. Then, as suddenly as they had come, they were gone. The only sound was the thudding of hooves fading to the east, the buzz of a fly, and the slow, heavy drip of water from the broken trough at the remote way station. She lay there for a long time. The sun moved across the sky, baking the earth and baking her. Thirst, a dull ache, grew into a raging fire. She crawled, her vision blurring, to the trough. The water was muddy, fouled by the raiders, but she drank it, her body sobbing with relief. She hid as night fell, burrowing into the scrub brush like a frightened rabbit. The body of Mr. Hatcher, a dark shape near the wagon. She was stranded. She had escaped Brandt only to be left for the buzzards. She must have lost time. She woke to the sun on her face again, her throat raw, her body a map of pain. She was so weak. This, she thought, was the end. She would die here, at a broken water stop, with no name and no marker. Then she heard it, the slow, steady clip-clop of a single horse. She tried to hide, to pull herself deeper into the mesquite, but her limbs would not obey. The horse stopped. She heard the creak of leather. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, squinting against the light, and saw a man. He was tall, broader than Brant, and dressed in rough-spun clothes caked with dust. He wore his hat low, but she could see the scar, a silvery white line that cut from his left temple down across his cheekbone, pulling the corner of his eye into a permanent, watchful squint. He was in his 30s, his face all angles, his mouth a hard, straight line. He held a rifle in the crook of his arm, and he looked at her with no expression at all. "Help me," she whispered. The sound was a dry rasp. The man's gaze moved from her to the wagon, to the body of Mr. Hatcher. He looked back at her. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "Raiders?" Lena nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. He stared at her for a full minute, and Lena felt a different kind of fear. This was not Brant's oily menace. This was something cold and empty. "I'm Lena Ward, from Mesilla." He said nothing. He just watched her, his eyes the color of the gunmetal sky before a storm. "Please," she begged. "Just water." He turned, unhooked a canteen from his saddle, and tossed it to her. It landed heavily in the dirt by her hand. She fumbled with the cap, her hands shaking, and drank. The water was warm and tasted of tin, and it was the best thing she had ever known. He watched her drink, his face impassive. "You're on my land. Or near enough." I didn't know. I was stranded." "You are," he agreed. He looked at the sky. "Coyotes will be here soon. For him." He nodded at Mr. Hatcher. "And for you, if you stay." He turned back to his horse. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through her weakness. "Wait, don't leave me." She tried to stand, but her legs collapsed. He sighed, a sound of pure impatience. He walked back to her, and for a moment, she thought he might strike her. Instead, he bent down, hooked his arms under her, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He did not hold her gently. He held her like a sack of grain. He dumped her unceremoniously onto the front of his saddle, climbed up behind her, and kicked the horse into a walk, leading the wagon mule behind them. He did not speak again. The ride was an agony. Every step of the horse sent a jolt through her bruised body. She was pressed against him, his chest a solid wall at her back, his arm a steel band around her waist. She could smell him, sweat, leather, horse, and something faintly metallic. They rode for what felt like hours, deeper into a landscape of red rock and sparse, thorny brush. She saw a cabin, finally, a small, mean-looking structure of stone and sod, barely more than a hovel. A rough corral stood nearby, empty. He pulled her off the horse and set her on her feet. Her knees buckled, and she leaned against the animal's warm flank, trembling. He disappeared inside the cabin and returned with a tin cup of water. He pushed it into her hand. "Drink." She did. "You can have the cot," he said, gesturing inside. "One night, in the morning, I'm taking you to Socorro. It's the nearest town. You can find your way from there." "I can't go to Socorro," she said, her voice small. I can't go to any town." He looked at her, his scarred eyes seeming to narrow. "Not my problem." "Please, he'll find me. The law, he's a marshal." The man actually snorted, a brief, harsh sound. "The law?" He spat into the dust. "The law doesn't come out here, but I don't take in strays. Mrs. Ward." He turned to go. "Wait," she cried, desperation making her bold. I have money. He stopped. He turned slowly. How much? $25, she lied, pulling the damp bundle from her chemise. It was all she had. He looked at the money, then at her. That buys you food and a ride to the stage line. It doesn't buy you a home. I'll work. I can cook. I can sew. I can clean. He looked at his cabin, a one-room shelter that was brutally, functionally clean. I can cook my own beans. And I don't need mending. He was dismissing her. He was going to turn her out. The fear of Brant, of being dragged back to Mesilla in chains, of being locked in a room until she submitted, was so powerful it choked her. She had to stay here. This cold, hard man was her only chance. Then marry me. The words hung in the dry air between them. The man, Calder Beckett, did not move. He did not blink. He simply stared, his face a mask of stone. She had seen him in Mesilla, once, years ago. He was the man they whispered about, the one who'd been in a shootout, the one who, rumor said, had killed his own brother. He was a pariah, a hermit, a killer, and he was all she had. What did you say? His voice was dangerously quiet. Marry me, she repeated, her voice shaking but gaining a desperate strength. It's a bargain, a transaction. I need protection. I need a name, a husband's name. Brant. The marshal, he can't take another man's wife. Not legally, not without a fight. Calder Beckett looked at her as if she were insane. You think my name protects anyone? In town, they cross the street to avoid me. My name is a curse. Woman. It's a wall, she countered, her mind racing. She had heard the gossip. She had to use it. I heard in town, the railroad. They're trying to take your land. His eyes flickered. It was the first real reaction she had gotten from him. They're using the Homestead Act, she pressed on, remembering the talk in her shop. Seizing claims from single men, saying they haven't been improved enough, but the law, it favors a family. A married man has a stronger claim. They can't just seize a family's home. She was offering him something. It wasn't just her $25. It was his land, his solitude, his survival. He looked away from her, his gaze sweeping over the harsh, beautiful, empty land that was his only companion. He was a man cornered, just as she was. The railroad on one side, and this strange, desperate woman on the other. You marry me, he said, his voice flat. And you are my wife. On paper. Nothing else. Relief and shame warred in her chest. I understand. No, he said, turning back to her. His eyes were cold. You will live in my house. You will cook. You will clean. You will not ask me where I go. You will not ask me what I do. You will not expect anything. You will not be a wife. You will be a chore, another mouth, another burden. And you, she asked, lifting her chin, what will you be? Your protection, he said, and the words sounded like a threat. He comes for you. He deals with me. That's the bargain. He spat again. I'll need that money. For the priest. They rode to Socorro 2 days later. Lena, washed and fed, felt stronger, but the silence in the cabin had been heavier than any stone. Calder had not spoken a single word to her. He had slept on the floor by the door, his gun belt next to his hand, leaving her the cot. The priest was a small, nervous man with sweat stains on his black coat. He looked from Lena, in her worn, faded dress, to Calder, scarred and grim, and his disapproval was obvious. Marriage is a sacrament. Mr. Beckett, a holy union, the priest stammered, looking at the $20 Calder slapped on the desk. And it's a legal contract, Calder said. We need the contract. Read the words, Father. They married in the dusty office. The only witness a clerk from the land office next door. Lena did not have a ring. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Calder simply stared at him until the priest looked away, flustered. There was no celebration. There was not even a handshake. Calder handed the priest a folded piece of paper, a receipt, Lena saw, for the sale of 5 head of cattle, the buyer's name left blank. "For the church's trouble," Calder said. The ride back was as silent as the ride there, but now she was Lena Beckett. The name felt heavy and strange in her mouth, a lie she had to swallow. Life on the ranch was a routine of harsh, grinding labor. Calder's cabin, she learned, was not just sparse, it was punishing. There was no well. She had to haul water from the creek, a quarter mile down a rocky path, the wooden yoke biting into her shoulders. She cooked over an open fire in the hearth, battling smoke that stung her eyes and grit that got in the food. And the man himself was a ghost. He was gone before sunrise, checking traps or mending fences on the far side of his property. He returned after dark, ate the beans and cornbread she left for him on the table, and said nothing. She slept on the cot. He slept on his pallet by the door. A fortress of silence and 6 feet of wooden floor separated them. He would not touch her. That was part of the bargain, but he would not look at her, either. Not for too long. She would catch him sometimes, his gaze fixed on her, his face unreadable, before he would turn away, his jaw tight. It was a cold, lonely existence, but she was safe. She was no longer hunted, she was just invisible. Then the small things began. A frost fell one night, a deep, sudden cold that turned the water in her bucket to ice. She woke, shivering violently under her single, thin blanket. She drifted in and out of a frozen sleep. When she woke properly, to a gray dawn, she was warm. He had put his own quilt over her. It was heavy, smelling of wood smoke and the faint, clean scent of the high desert. He was by the hearth, wrapped in his saddle blanket, his back to her, drinking coffee. Neither of them mentioned it. A week later, she was trying to mend the sole of her boot, which had split open on the rocks. Her needle, meant for calico and silk, snapped against the thick leather. She threw it down in frustration, tears of anger and exhaustion blurring her vision. She went to haul water, and when she returned, the boots were gone. He returned late that night. He dropped a pair of boots on the floor by her cot. They were worn, but the leather was supple, and the soles were sound. "My mother's," he grunted, not looking at her. "Years ago, they might fit." She put them on. They fit perfectly. She looked up to thank him, but he was already checking the load in his rifle, his attention 1,000 miles away, before he put the boots down. Though she had seen him. He had run his rough thumb over the leather of the sole, checking for holes. A brief, unconscious gesture. The woods around the cabin unnerved her. They were thick with pine and aspen, and the shadows seemed to move. When she hung the laundry, his rough shirts, her one spare dress, she felt as if unseen eyes were watching her. She found herself jumping at the snap of a twig or the call of a crow. She said nothing. To complain was to be a burden, and the bargain was clear. One morning, she woke to the sound of an axe. Not the rhythmic thunk of him splitting firewood, but the sharp, heavy thwack of digging. She went to the door. Calder was 20 yards from the cabin, digging post holes. He was moving the fence line. He was taking down the corral fence and rebuilding it, section by section, to create a small, defined yard that enclosed the cabin, the lean-to, and the laundry line. It was back-breaking, unnecessary work. It took him 4 days. When he was finished, she stood by the new sturdy gate. "Why?" she asked him. He was coiling his rope, his shoulders tight. He did not look at her. "Keeps the coyotes from the scrap bucket." But Lena knew. The woods still watched, but now they watched from behind a fence. He had built her a wall. She began to watch him, too, She watched the way he moved, with a coiled, quiet grace that seemed at odds with his size. She watched his hands, scarred and calloused. As he mended a bridle, they were gentle with the leather. Calder, for his part, was in his own quiet hell. He had agreed to the bargain to save his land. The ranch was all he had left of a life that had been burned to the ground by his own actions. He had killed his own brother. Yes, he had done it to stop a greater evil, but the world only saw the blood. He had come here to be alone, to let the world forget him, and to punish himself. And now, this woman was here. This pale woman with the red hair that caught the firelight. He battled a quiet, suffocating guilt. He had not lied. He was a dangerous man. He had a violence in him, a dark, hot thing he kept chained. He was convinced that to touch her, to even look at her with the desire that was building in his chest, was to corrupt her. She had come to him for protection, and he was the most dangerous thing within 100 miles. He watched her hang laundry, her arms pale against the blue sky, and a fierce, protective instinct warred with a burning, physical hunger. He felt a desire so strong it scared him. It was a desire to protect, yes, but also to own, in a way that Brant, in his clumsy, cruel way, could never understand. He wanted to touch her hair. He wanted to see her smile. A real smile. Not the tight, nervous twitch she gave him when she handed him his plate. He was terrified that if he touched her, his corruption would spread. He would taint her. He would ruin the one clean thing, the one soft thing, that had accidentally fallen into his bitter life. So he kept his distance. He gave her his quilt. He fixed her boots. He built her a fence. And he slept by the door, his gun in his hand, guarding her from the world, and, most of all, guarding her from himself. The sky turned yellow first. It was a strange, sickly color that bled into the brown of the horizon, erasing the line between earth and air. Lena, hanging Calder's last clean shirt on the line, felt the wind shift. It stopped being a breeze and became a presence, a low, keening moan that came from everywhere at once. Calder rode in hard, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. He did not shout. He simply swung down from the saddle, grabbed the axe from the woodpile, and began checking the shutters on the cabin's 2 small windows. "Get the water," he ordered. It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her all week. "Fill every bucket, then get inside." She did not question him. She ran to the creek path, the yoke banging against her shoulders, the wind tearing at her skirts and filling her mouth with grit. The air was so thick with dust she could barely see the water. She made 4 trips, her lungs burning, until every pail and pot in the cabin was full. When she stumbled inside the last time, he was there. He shut the heavy plank door, the wind fighting him, and dropped the thick wooden bar into place. The world outside disappeared. The cabin was plunged into a dim, orange-brown twilight, lit only by the weak glow from the hearth. And then the sound began. It was not a moan anymore. It was a roar, a solid wall of noise, as if a great beast were trying to claw its way in. Fine. Powdery dust began to sift from the roof sod, raining down on the table, the cot, and the floor. It fell onto her hair and settled in the lines of her hands. "How long?" she asked, her voice sounding small and thin against the gale. Calder was stuffing rags into the cracks around the door. "Days, maybe." He did not look at her. The first day was a trial of noise and grit. They moved like shadows in the single room, wrapped in a deafening, vibrating cocoon. Lena swept the floor, and an hour later, it was covered again. She cooked cornmeal mush, and they ate it in silence. The taste of dust in every bite. The air grew close and stale, thick with wood smoke and the smell of their own bodies. Calder, trapped, was a caged animal. He paced the small floor. From the door to the hearth. 4 steps. Turn. 4 steps. He checked his rifle. He oiled his tack. He stared at the wall. Lena sat on her cot, her hands idle in her lap. There was nothing to sew, Nothing to clean that would stay clean. There was only the storm and the man, the silence between them. Once a routine, now felt charged and heavy, weighed down by the screaming wind. On the second night, the wind lessened, but the dust remained. A thick, choking fog. The cabin felt smaller than ever. Calder, apparently unable to bear his own restlessness, sat at the small table, sharpening a knife with rhythmic, angry strokes. Scrape, hiss, scrape, hiss. Lena, her nerves rubbed raw, finally spoke, just to break the sound. My husband, Elias, he had a knife like that. He won it in a card game in Santa Fe. Calder's hands stilled. He did not look up. A gambler. It was not a question. It was a judgment. A flush of shame, hot and familiar, rose in Lena's throat. Yes, she said, her voice tight. He was a gambler. Calder went back to his knife. Scrape, hiss. He wasn't a cheat, she said, her voice louder. He was just weak and lucky. Until he wasn't, he won a pot from a man who worked for the land office. That's all it was. But that man was a friend of Joel Brandt's. She was talking to the man's back, but the words kept coming, spilling into the dusty air. Brandt locked him up, said he assaulted an officer when they came to take him. Elias never hit anyone in his life. He was a talker. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I tried to stop them. I told Brandt it was a lie. I went to the jail every day. I brought food. Brandt. He told me I was wasting my time, that Elias was a blight, and that I was too good for him. The memory of Brandt's eyes on her, stripping her, owning her, made her shiver. He blamed me. When the mob came, Brandt said I had riled them up, defending a cheat. He said my defiance had sealed Elias's fate. She was whispering now, the shame so thick she could barely breathe. I was a widow, but in town, in Brandt's eyes, I was worse. I was the woman who had caused it all. The shame, it was worse than the grief. Grief is clean. This was dirty. She had never said it aloud. She had never given voice to the brand that Brandt had put on her. Calder stopped sharpening his knife. The silence that fell was different, heavier. The storm outside seemed to be listening. He stood up, walked to the hearth, and poured a cup of water from the bucket. He handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers. It was the first time he had willingly touched her skin. His hand was rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. Brandt, Calder said, his back to her again as he stared into the low fire. He's a snake in the grass, but the law protects its own. He picked up a poker and jabbed at the embers. Towns are full of snakes and gossip. They don't care about the truth. They just care about the story. He was quiet for a long time. The wind picked up again, a low, mournful howl. I was on a cattle crew, he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear him. Texas, down to the Pecos. 10 years ago. I was different then. Younger, dumber. He sat on his pallet by the door, his big frame folding in on itself. We were driving a herd, 3,000 head, hard work, the crew. They were hard men. My brother, Silas, was the hardest. He was my older brother. Always mean. We found a homestead, a Mexican family, man, his wife, 2 little kids. They had a spring, a good one. Our herd was thirsty. The man, he came out, offered water for us, but not the herd. Said it was all they had. It would foul his well for a year. He was polite. He offered us food. Calder's hands clenched into fists on his knees. Silas. He didn't like being told no, especially not by a Mexican. He and 3 others, they rode in, He stopped. He swallowed, a hard, clicking sound in his throat. They murdered them, all of them. The children, too, for a spring of water. For a moment of power. And they were laughing. Lena put a hand over her mouth, a silent gasp. I wasn't there, he continued, his voice a dead monotone. I was riding drag. When I got there, I saw the smoke. I saw what they did. Silas he was standing there, wiping his hands, telling the others to start moving the herd toward the water, and he smiled at me. I told him he was a monster. He said he was a man. He said this was his land, and he'd take it how he saw fit. He raised his rifle. He was going to shoot me. His own brother, right there. So I shot him first. The confession hung in the smoke-filled air. I didn't just kill him, Calder whispered. One of the other men drew on me. I killed him too, the other two. They fled. They rode straight to the nearest ranger. And they told the story. They told everyone that Calder Beckett had gone mad, that I'd murdered my own brother and a trail hand in a fight over a Mexican whore. He finally looked at her. His scarred eye, the dead one, was just a pale line. But his good eye was filled with a pain so deep it looked like a physical wound. They never found the bodies of the family. I buried them. Took me all night. But the story was already set. The town, the papers. I was a brother killer. A woman killer. They hated me. They still do. The gossip. It's all they know. He stood up. The movement violent. So you see, Mrs. Beckett, he said, the name sounding like a curse. You didn't marry a wall. You married a monster, and his name won't protect you from anything. The storm broke on the fourth morning. The silence when the wind stopped was as shocking as its roar. Calder opened the door, and the light that flooded in was painful. The world was scoured clean, every rock and thorn bush etched against a bright, pale sky. The air in the cabin had changed. The dust had settled, but the truth of their pasts was now in the room, living and breathing alongside them. Lena, watching him strip and clean his rifle, felt something other than fear. He was not a monster. He was a man who had paid for a moment of justice with his entire life. She picked up his shirt, the one she had been mending before the storm. The needle was still in it. She sat on her cot, the light from the open door falling on her hands, and she began to sew. She made the stitches small and neat, reinforcing the torn collar. It was a simple, domestic act. He stopped his work to watch her. He watched her fingers, pale and thin, as they moved with practiced grace. He watched the way her red hair, which she had braided to keep the dust out, caught a stray beam of light. He stared for a long, long time, his face hard, but his eyes were full of a terrible, aching hunger. He stared until she looked up, her cheeks flushing, and he abruptly turned back to his rifle, his movements stiff. That night, the awkwardness returned, sharper this time. The knowledge sat between them, a living thing after their sparse meal. Calder unstrapped a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebag. He poured a finger's worth into a tin cup and pushed it toward her. For the dust, he said. She drank. It was raw and fiery, burning a clean path down her throat. He poured 2 fingers for himself and drank it down, then poured another. They sat by the fire, the cabin shadows dancing around them. The whiskey, combined with her exhaustion, made Lena feel light, almost brave. Calder was staring into the flames, his profile all harsh angles and shadow. You should have told me, he said, about Brant, that he was after you. I would have, I don't know. What? She asked. You would have refused me. You would have sent me away. I would have understood the bargain better, he said, his voice rough. It doesn't matter, she said. A bargain is a bargain. Is it? He looked at her, his good eye pinning her. The whiskey had softened the hard line of his mouth. This ain't a life for you, Lena. Hauling water, living in the dirt, with me. It is a life, she said, her voice quiet but fierce. It is safe." He moved. He was sitting on his pallet, and she on her cot. The space between them was only 2 feet. He reached out, his hand moving slow, as if he were taming a horse. He touched her hair, a single, rough finger tracing the line of her braid. Lena stopped breathing. He leaned in. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, the wood smoke on his skin. His face was close, his eyes dark with something she had not seen before, not just hunger, but a deep, profound loneliness. They were going to kiss. The thought was terrifying and thrilling. Her body, so long braced for pain or ignored in grief, suddenly felt alive. He was inches from her mouth when he froze. He seemed to break, as if coming out of a trance. He pulled back, his hand dropping as if burned. He stood up, his body rigid. "You didn't marry me for that," he said, his voice a harsh rasp. He was angry, but she knew, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that the anger was for himself. He turned to go, to flee to his pallet by the door, to put the space back between them. But Lena was tired. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being a ghost, tired of being ashamed. "Calder," she said. He stopped, his back to her. She stood up. She walked to him. She, who had been scared of his shadow, now stood in front of him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She took his hand. It was large, scarred, and trembling slightly. She placed it flat against her own chest, over her heart. His eyes widened, a flicker of shock in their depths. Under his palm, her heart was hammering, a frantic, trapped bird. "I know what I married you for," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "But I am so tired of being cold. I need to remember I'm still alive." It was an invitation. It was a plea. It was a confession. He stared at her, his face a war of guilt and desire. She was offering him a warmth he was convinced he would only poison. He could feel the frantic beat of her heart against his palm, a living, vital thing. He pulled his hand away. He did not say a word. He grabbed his hat, opened the door, and walked out into the cold, clear night. Lena stood in the empty cabin, her hand over her own heart. She had not been rejected. She had been protected from him. He did not return until morning. When he did, he looked as though he had not slept in a week, but he said nothing about the night before. He simply picked up his tools and went to fix the corral fence, broken by the storm. Spring arrived. The high desert, which Lena had thought was only brown and red, suddenly blushed with life. Pale green shoots pushed through the hard-packed earth. Small, hardy flowers, purple and yellow, appeared in the shade of the rocks. One of their few cows, a rangy beast with mismatched horns, was pregnant. Calder had been watching her, and one morning, he did not ride out. "It's time," he said. The cow was in distress. She was lying in the new, fenced-in yard, groaning, her body straining. "The calf is breached," Calder said, his face grim. "It's turned around." He took a rope. "I'll have to pull it. She might not make it. The calf, probably already lost." "No," Lena said. She dropped the laundry she was carrying. "Let me try." He looked at her, his brows drawing together. It's not for—" "I helped my father," she said, stripping off her apron. "We had cows. I'm small. My hands are small. Let me try to turn it." He stared at her for a moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. He held the cow's head, stroking her, speaking to her in a low, rumbling voice that Lena had never heard him use. Lena, her heart pounding, washed her hands and arms in the water bucket, rolled up her sleeves, and did what her father had taught her. It was bloody, difficult, and primal work, but she did not flinch. She felt the small, slippery hooves, the wrongness of them. She pushed, gently, firmly, ignoring the cow's heaving cries, until, with a great, slippery rush, the calf was turned. "Now!" she shouted. Calder pulled. A few minutes later, a small, wet, and blessedly alive calf lay steaming on the ground. Lena sat back on her heels, covered in sweat and birth fluid, and she laughed. It was a real laugh, a sound that startled her as much as it did Calder. He was watching her, not the calf, her. He was watching her, with her hair falling out of its braid, her face smeared with dirt, and her dress ruined. And he was seeing, for the first time, not the frightened refugee, but the woman who had birthed a calf and laughed in the spring sun. He looked away, toward the cabin. Lena had, in the weeks since the storm, changed it. She had unstitched one of her old, worn-out petticoats and hung the white, ruffled fabric as curtains over the windows. She had found wild herbs and tied them, and the cabin no longer smelled only of dust and him, but of sage and thyme. She had brought life into his stone box. She was a presence, a warmth, a woman who knew how to turn a calf. He realized with a jolt that was almost panic, beginning to need her there. The thunderstorm came a week later. It was not a dust storm. It was a deluge. The sky cracked open with a boom that rattled the pans on the shelf. Lena dropped the plate she was washing. It shattered on the floor. Another flash of lightning lit the cabin in a stark, blue-white glare, followed by an immediate, ear-splitting crack of thunder. Lena screamed. She did not make a sound, but her mouth was open, her body rigid. She slid down the cabin wall, her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the weather. "Lena," Calder said. She was shaking, a violent, rattling tremor. She was seeing the torches. She was hearing the shouts of the mob, the sound of the horse rearing, the thud of the jailhouse door breaking. She was seeing Elias's face, white and terrified, in the flickering, erratic light of the torches. "Lena!" Calder was in front of her. He put his hands on her shoulders, and she flinched violently. "Don't!" she whispered, her voice choked. "Please, the light, they're coming." He understood. This, for her, was the sound of a lynching. He looked at her, small and broken on his floor, and the last of his walls crumbled. The guilt, the fear, the self-hatred, they were all second to the fierce, undeniable need to protect this woman. He did not hesitate. He knelt, put one arm behind her back and one under her knees, and lifted her. He carried her to her cot, but she was clinging to him, her fingers like claws in his shirt, her face buried in his chest, sobbing without sound. He sat on the cot, pulling her into his lap, holding her against him as one would hold a terrified child. He held her tightly, his arms a solid wall around her. "You're safe," he whispered, his rough voice close to her ear. The thunder cracked again, and she jumped, a small, animal sound in her throat. He just held her tighter. "It's just rain, Lena, it's just the sky. You're here, you're in my house, you're safe." He repeated it, over and over, his voice a low, steady rumble against her ear. "I won't let anything hurt you. I won't let anything hurt you." She cried for a long time. He just held her. He rocked her, his large, rough hand stroking her tangled hair, until the sobs subsided into shudders, and the shudder subsided into the steady, quiet rhythm of breathing. The storm passed. She was asleep, her face pressed into his shirt, her body lax. He looked down at her, at the tear tracks on her dirt-smudged cheek, and a tenderness so fierce it was painful swelled in his chest. He did not put her down. He was afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. He lay down on his own pallet, pulling her with him, never breaking contact. He lay on his back and settled her against his side, her head on his shoulder. He pulled his quilt over both of them. That night, they slept fully clothed, side by side. He did not sleep by the door. She did not sleep on the cot. They slept together, her shoulder pressed against his, His arm curved possessively around her waist. It was not the sleep of desire. It was the sleep of survivors, of two broken halves finding a fragile, temporary hole in the dark. Waking up pressed against Calder's side became a new, unspoken routine. They never mentioned the thunderstorm. They never spoke of the night he had held her on his pallet. But neither of them moved. She no longer went to the cot. He no longer slept by the door. They slept clothed, a thin blanket separating them as much as covering them, but they slept. For the first time since Elias's death, Lena slept through the night, a deep, healing sleep. The feel of his solid, warm back against hers was a wall, not a prison. And Calder lay awake in the dark, rigid, listening to her breathe. He was acutely, painfully aware of every shift, every soft sigh. Having her this close was a constant, low-grade fever. He had held her in his arms, and now the memory of her weight, the scent of her hair, was branded on him. He felt the pull, the deep, animal want, and he fought it with every ounce of his self-control. He had offered her safety, and he would rather die than betray that trust. He would rather burn than make her feel hunted in his own home. This fragile, silent truce lasted for 3 weeks. It was a time of quiet work. She planted a small garden in the lee of the cabin, her hands in the dirt. He broke a new horse, his movements firm and quiet. They were two people moving in a shared, small orbit, careful not to collide. The truce was broken by a man named Jedediah Smith, a freighter who passed through the high country once every 2 months. He was the closest thing Calder had to an acquaintance. He brought supplies, salt, coffee, flour, and took Calder's cured pelts. He arrived on a Tuesday, his wagon groaning. Lena, shy and uncertain, brought him a cup of water. Jedediah, a wiry man with a face like dried leather, looked from her to Calder, his eyes sharp with curiosity.
"Heard you took a wife, Beckett,"
Jedediah said, taking the cup. "Town's buzzing. Folks was surprised." Calder merely nodded, his face impassive as he counted out the sacks of flour.
"The coffee, Jed."
Right. The freighter paused.
"Thing is,
Calder, maybe it ain't my place, but the talk, it ain't just idle gossip. The law is in on it." Lena, who had been turning to go back inside, froze. Her back was to them, but every nerve in her body was alert. Calder did not move, but his voice went flat and cold. "What talk?" "Well," Jedediah hedged, scratching his beard. "It's that deputy marshal, Brandt, from down Messilia way. He's looking for this woman." He did not look at Lena, but the implication was clear. "He's posted a notice in Socorro, at the marshal's office. Says she's a fugitive, fled a pending inquiry." Lena's blood ran cold. She gripped the cabin door frame. "Inquiry into what?" Calder's voice was dangerously quiet. "Says here," Jedediah pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, "for aiding and abetting a fugitive. That'd be her husband, Elias Ward, and assault on an officer of the law." Lena made a small, choked sound. Assault. He had twisted her, fighting him off. Her defense of Elias into an assault. He had made her the criminal.
"He's using the telegraph, Beckett,"
Jedediah said, his voice lower. "He's serious. He's offering a reward, $50. Says she's property of the court until her case is heard. He's sent mail to every postmaster in the territory, including Socorro." Calder took the paper from Jedediah's hand. He read it. Lena watched his shoulders, the set of his back. He did not move, but she felt the stillness, the coiled, terrible quiet that she now recognized as his anger. He folded the paper. "And the mail?" "Postmaster Ames. He's a stickler for the rules. He's got a letter addressed to Brandt, under care of the Socorro office. He thinks it's from someone up here, reporting, citing her. He's bound by law to forward it." Calder nodded once. I thank you for the information, Jed, and for the supplies. Calder, be careful. This Brant, he's got the badge. You're just you. And folks around here, they'll side with the badge over you every time. I know what folks are, Calder said. He handed Jedediah his payment. The transaction was over. The freighter left, and the silence he left behind was heavy with dread. Lena turned to Calder. His face was granite.
He lied,
she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron.
I never assaulted anyone.
She couldn't say it. I know, Calder said. He picked up his saddlebags. He checked his rifle.
What are you doing?
She asked, panic rising. Going to town. No, Calder, no. Brant. He wants this. He wants a fight. He's using the law to trap you. He's using the mail, Calder said. His voice clipped. And Ames is a coward. He won't forward that letter. You can't ride in there. They all hate you. Jedediah said it. They'll arrest you. He turned to her, and his good eye was blazing. He is not putting your name on a fugitive poster. He is not hunting you while you are under my roof. He is not turning my neighbors into bounty hunters. He slung the saddlebags over his shoulder. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone. I'll be back by morning. He left. Lena was alone, with the bar dropped on the door and the fugitive poster lying on her table. She had brought this. She had brought the law, the one thing he could not fight, to his door. She had traded her safety for his, and the bargain felt bitter as poison. The ride to Socorro was 20 miles of hard, dusty land. Calder rode his best horse, a rangy dun, and he did not spare it. He was not a man given to fits of rage. His anger was a cold, slow-burning thing. It was the same coldness he had felt when he saw his brother standing over the bodies of that family. It was the anger of injustice, the one fire he could not put out in himself. He arrived in Socorro in the late afternoon. The town was a string of adobe and false front buildings along a wide, muddy street. He tied the dun in front of the post office, ignoring the way a group of men on the boardwalk stopped talking to watch him. He was used to it. The scar, the name, the rumors. They were his shadow. The post office was a small, hot room that smelled of ink and mice. Postmaster Ames was a thin man in a green visor, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as Calder filled the doorway.
Beckett?
Ames stammered, his hands fluttering over a stack of letters. What brings you in? Calder put his hands flat on the counter. He did not lean. He did not threaten. He simply was, I'm here for my mail. Mail? You ain't got no mail, Beckett. You know that. And I'm here, Calder continued, his voice dropping, about a letter you're holding, one addressed to a Deputy Marshal Brant. Ames's face went pale.
That is official government business. I cannot.
That letter, Ames, it's a lie. It's from a man named Silas Croft on the South Range. He's got a grudge against me. He saw Mrs. Beckett, and he's trying to stir trouble. You send that letter, you are aiding in a false report. I don't know nothing about that. I just follow the regulations. It's my duty. Your duty, Calder said, his voice like gravel, is to not get men killed. You send that letter, and Brant comes. And when he comes, there will be blood, and it will be on your hands.
Do you understand me?
Ames was shaking. He looked at Calder's scarred face, at the deadness in his eyes, and he saw a man who understood blood. Now, I am telling you, Calder said, as a concerned citizen. That letter, it's fraudulent. It should be lost or burned. A simple mistake. It happens all the time. Ames swallowed.
Yes, a mistake. Things get misplaced.
Good. Calder nodded. He turned to leave. Beckett! Ames squeaked. Calder paused. That notice, it's still up. In the marshal's office. I can't do nothing about that. I know, Calder said, and walked out. The sun was lower, painting the street in shades of orange and purple. The group of men was still on the boardwalk, but now they were blocking his path. There were 4 of them. One of them, a big, heavy-set man with a stained beard, stepped forward. Well, looky here, the man said. If it ain't the brother killer himself. Thought we smelled something foul. Calder recognized him. Luke Haney, a man whose ranch adjoined Calder's, and who had been vocal in trying to get Calder's claim invalidated. He was also, Calder recalled, a cousin of Silas Croft. Calder said nothing. He just moved to step around them, toward his horse. Haney shifted, blocking him again. What's the matter, Beckett? Too good to talk to your neighbors? Or you just in a hurry to get back to that red-headed fugitive? You're hiding. Calder stopped. The street went quiet. A dog stopped barking. Heard you married her. Haney sneered and spat a wad of tobacco juice that landed on Calder's boot. A killer and a whore. Seems fitting. Calder looked at the spittle on his boot. He looked at Haney's smug, waiting face. He felt the familiar, hot rush, the urge to grab Haney by the throat and smash his face into the boardwalk. He felt the weight of his gun on his hip, the satisfying heft of it. He could end this, 1 move, 1 second. And he saw, with perfect clarity, what would happen. He would be arrested. He would be in a cell. And Lena, alone on the ranch, would be unprotected. Brant would come, and there would be no one to stop him. He would win the fight and lose everything. He had already lived that. He had shot his brother. He had won, and he had lost his life. Calder looked at Haney. He did not wipe his boot. He just stepped off the boardwalk, into the muddy street, and walked around the group. He spat on you! Beckett! Haney roared, his face purpling with rage at the lack of a fight. Are you a coward to go with being a killer? Turn around and draw. Calder untied his horse. He's a yellow belly, one of the other men cackled. Turn around, Beckett, Haney shouted, his hand hovering over his own gun. He wanted a fight he could win, a fight that would make him a hero. Calder put his foot in the stirrup. He did not look back. He swung his leg over the saddle. A rock flew through the air, striking him hard in the back of the head. He grunted, his vision flashing white, but he did not fall. He just settled into the saddle. Another rock struck his shoulder. He kicked the dun into a walk, then a trot, leaving the shouts and insults behind him. He did not run, he just left. He rode out of town, his head bleeding, his back aching, but his gun in its holster. He got back to the ranch well after midnight. He was cold, exhausted, and the cut on his head had bled down his neck, staining his shirt. Lena was sitting at the table. The lamp was low. A rifle was across her lap. When she heard his footstep, she was on her feet, the rifle up, before he could open the door. It's me, he said, his voice weary. She fumbled with the bar, and the door swung open. She saw his face in the moonlight. The caked blood, the exhaustion.
Oh, God,
she whispered.
they hurt you.
She pulled him inside, her fear for him overriding her fear of him. She barred the door, then pushed him gently onto the stool. Sit. He let her. He was too tired to argue. He was too tired to be the monster. He just sat, his hands on his knees, and let her. She came back with a basin of water, precious water she had to haul, and a clean rag. Her hands were shaking. She stood behind him, where he could not see her face, and she began to gently clean the wound on his head. His hair was matted with blood and dirt. She was careful, her touch so light it was barely there, but with every dab of the wet cloth, he flinched, his muscles tensing.
What happened?
She asked, her voice quiet. Ames won't send the letter. His voice was rough.
This isn't from Ames,
she said, dabbing at a dark bruise forming on his cheekbone. one he'd gotten from one of the rocks.
This is from a fight.
There was no fight, he said, his voice muffled.
They hurt you.
They… Luke Haney?
Silas Croft?
Haney and others. She moved to stand in front of him, to clean the bruise. Her face was level with his. She was so close he could see the freckles on her nose, the green in her hazel eyes. Her hand was trembling.
He spat on you,
she said. It was not a question. He looked up, surprised.
Croft, he told you.
No, she said, her voice fierce.
I know a man like Haney. I know what they do. He insulted you. He insulted me. And he spat on you. And you took this… Why? Why didn't you defend yourself?
He looked at her, at the genuine confusion and anger in her eyes. She, who had been so terrified of his violent reputation, was now asking him why he had not used it. He reached up, his hand calloused and rough, and captured her wrist. He held her hand, the one with the wet cloth, and just held it. Because, he said, his voice raw, because I already know what it's like to win and lose the same fight. She stared at him. She understood. He was not talking about Haney. He was talking about his brother. He was talking about the victory that had cost him his soul. He had chosen her safety, over his pride. He had chosen to be a coward in their eyes, to be her protection in reality. The silence in the cabin was absolute. There was only the sound of their breathing. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a wave of something. It was a warmth, a deep, aching pull that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man in front of her. The man who had taken rocks for her. The man who slept on the floor. The man who had held her during a storm. She had come here for protection, but she was looking at a man who was just as broken as she was, and who had just chosen, for the first time in 10 years, to build something instead of destroy. She leaned in. It was a small movement. He saw it coming, his good eye widening in shock. She put her free hand on his shoulder, to steady herself, and she touched her lips to his. It was not a wife's kiss. It was hesitant, trembling, and deeply, terribly chaste. It was just the press of her mouth against his, a question. It was slow. It was asking him, silently, to please, want her, to be a man, not a monster. Calder froze. His entire body went rigid. This was the one thing he had not prepared for. Her, touching him, her, wanting him. He had spent months fighting his own desire, and he had never once considered hers. He did not move. He did not breathe. He was terrified. He was terrified he would break her, that the violence in him, the thing he kept chained, would rise up and… She started to pull back, a flush of shame and rejection rising on her face. She had misread everything. He was her guardian, her jailer, and he did not want her. That, more than the kiss itself, broke his restraint. The thought of her feeling shame again. He moved. His hands, which had been passive on his knees, came up. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. His touch was reverent. One hand went to her back, a solid, steady pressure. The other came up to her face, his rough, calloused thumb brushing her cheek, as if checking she was real. He leaned in, just an inch, and his lips brushed hers. He was answering. It was tentative, unpracticed. He had not kissed a woman in 10 years. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her mouth. His voice was a broken, desperate sound. "Lena, are you sure?" She did not trust her voice. She just nodded, a small, jerky movement, and kissed him again. This time, she was not just asking, she was answering. He responded. He deepened the kiss, but it was not a kiss of hunger. It was a kiss of agonizing tenderness. It was a kiss of starved men, a kiss that tasted of dust and whiskey and loneliness and a desperate, fragile hope. He stood, pulling her with him. He did not carry her. He walked with her. his arm around her, his lips never leaving hers, as if he was afraid she would disappear. He walked her to his pallet, the one they had shared. He sat and pulled her down, so she was facing him, her knees on either side of his hips. He touched her. He touched her with a reverence that made her want to weep. His hands, the hands that had killed, that had built a fence, that had held a calf. They were shaking. He touched her hair, pulling the pins out, letting the red strands fall. He traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her neck. "You're beautiful," he rasped, as if the admission pained him. "You're not a monster," she whispered back. They made love. It was fumbling and awkward and perfect. It was not the slick, practiced rutting of a saloon or the dutiful, silent submission of her first marriage. It was two people, scarred and broken, who were trying to find a place to rest. It was tentative. He moved slowly, his eyes locked on hers, as if asking permission for every single touch, every single movement. And she, who had been braced for pain, felt only a profound, aching, emotional release. It was deeply, deeply emotional. It was two solitudes, meeting in the dark. After, he did not pull away. He held her. He held her as he had during the storm, his arms locked around her, his face buried in her hair. He was shaking. He had not just made love to a woman. He had connected. He had let someone into the cold, empty room of his heart. Lena lay there, listening to his heart pound against her ear. And for the first time, she did not feel like Lena Ward, the widow, or Lena Beckett, the bargain. She felt like Lena. The next morning, they were both quiet. The light in the cabin felt too bright, too harsh. They were uncertain. They avoided each other's eyes. What had happened? Had it been a mistake, a moment of weakness born of violence and fear? Calder was the first to move. He dressed, his back to her, his movements stiff. He grabbed his axe, and he left. He was gone all day. Lena was left alone, her body aching, her heart a confusion of fear and a strange, new tenderness. She had given herself to him, and he had walked away. He came back at dusk. He was hauling logs. He did not say a word to her. He ate the food she left, and then he went back outside. For 3 days, he worked, from sunup to sundown. She heard the thud of the axe, the rasp of a saw, the thwack of a hammer. He was building something. She thought, with a sinking heart, that he was building a wall. On the 4th day, he was finished. He had built a second room. It was small, barely more than a lean-to, attached to the side of the cabin. It was rough-hewn, but it was solid. It had a door. It had its own small window. He stood in the doorway of the main cabin, wiping his face. He looked at her, then at the new room. You might want space," he said, his voice rough, not meeting her eyes. It's your own. You can have your cot in there. A place to be alone." He had done it. He had taken her offering, her body, her self, and he had been so terrified of it. He had built her a separate room. He was pushing her away. He was protecting her from himself. Again. Tears of anger and humiliation stung her eyes. He thought it had been a mistake, that she needed space from him. She said nothing. She walked past him, her head held high. She went to the cot, which was still in the main room. She picked up her spare dress and her hairbrush. He watched her, his face a mask of misery. He had done the right thing. He had given her a choice. She walked to his pallet, the one where they had slept, the one where they had been. She dropped her dress and her brush on his quilt. Then she went and picked up her cot. It was heavy, but she was strong. She dragged it, scraping it along the floor. Calder stepped forward. "Lena, I can—" She dragged it to the new room, and she threw it inside with a clatter. Then she went back to the main room. She grabbed her thin blanket. She threw it on top of the cot. She turned and faced him. He was standing in the doorway, lost, confused, and heartbroken. Lena walked back to his pallet. She picked up her brush. She sat on his quilt, her back to him, and she began, with steady, angry strokes, to brush her hair. She had moved her things into his bed. He stood there for a full minute, just watching her. He understood. She was not running. She was not asking for space. She was staying. He walked into the cabin. He shut the main door. He walked to the pallet and sat down behind her. He did not touch her. He just sat.
I'm not good at this, Lena,
he whispered, his voice thick.
Neither am I,
she said, her voice shaking. She stopped brushing. He reached out, his hand hovering, and then, with a decision, he put it on her shoulder. They began to live, truly live. It was not a magical change. It was slow. It was awkward. But it was real. They were intimate. He touched her. He touched her in the daylight, a hand on her arm as he passed, his fingers brushing hers when she gave him his coffee. And at night, they slept. Truly, they made love, not with the desperate, tentative fumbling of the first time to see if they could, but with a slow, quiet affection. They were learning each other's bodies, each other's scars. They were affectionate. She found herself smiling at him. He did not smile. Not really, but the hard line of his mouth would soften. He would watch her garden, and his eyes were not cold. They were still haunted. They did not talk of their pasts. Brant was a shadow. Silas was a ghost. But they were not alone in the dark anymore. The letter arrived a month later. Jedediah brought it, and he looked sick. "Calder," he said, handing it over. It's from the federal marshal in Santa Fe. It's for you." Calder took it. He knew. He could feel the weight of it. He opened it in the cabin. Lena watched him, her hands twisting in her apron. His face, which had been so soft these past weeks, turned back into stone.
"What is it?"
she asked. He handed her the paper. It was a warrant, a federal warrant, signed by Joel Brant and countersigned by a judge. It was a warrant for the arrest of Calder Beckett, for harboring a known fugitive, for her.
He did it,
she whispered. He went around Ames. He went to the judge. "He's coming," Calder said, his voice flat. He was already checking his rifle. He was already the man he used to be. "We can't fight this. Lena, it's not Haney. It's the United States government. He's got the law. We've got nothing." He looked at her, his face grim. "We have to flee. We have to go north, to the territories. Colorado, maybe. We can disappear." He was offering to leave his land, the land he had killed for, the land he had married her to protect. He was offering to leave it for her. Lena looked at the warrant. She looked at this man, her husband, who was willing to run. She remembered hiding in the wagon. She remembered cowering from the raiders. She remembered the fear of Brant, a cold, sickening thing that had ruled her for a year. She took the warrant from his hand. She walked to the hearth, and she dropped it into the fire. Calder watched, stunned, as the paper curled and blackened. Lena turned to face him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were not afraid. They were clear. They were angry. "No," she said, her voice quiet, but hard as his fence posts. "I'm done running." Calder watched the ashes of the warrant drift in the hearth. He had offered her escape, a new life built on running. She had chosen to stand. He saw the woman she was, not the frightened widow he had found by the road, but a person forged in grief and fire, and she was done being afraid. He said nothing. Words were not what this moment required. He turned, walked to the pegs on the wall, and took down his heavy Winchester. He checked its action, a smooth, metallic schlick-schlack that filled the small cabin. Then he reached for the rifle that had been his father's, a lighter, shorter-barreled Springfield carbine. It was older, but it was reliable, and it was true. He walked back to her and held it out, stock first. Lena looked at the gun as if it were a coiled snake. It was the instrument of her husband's world, the tool of his death, the symbol of the violence that defined Calder's past. I don't know how," she whispered, her hands remaining at her sides. "I know," he said, his voice flat. He did not move. He just held it out, waiting. "If you're done running, you're done being unarmed. Brant is coming. The men from the town, they're coming. They will not be carrying Bibles." She looked from his scarred, hard face to the polished wood and cold, blue-black steel of the weapon. Taking it was a promise. It was an acceptance of the world he lived in, a world where safety was not given, but taken and held by force. Her hand, pale and marked by pinpricks and thread burns, rose. She took the rifle. The weight surprised her. It was heavy, a solid, terrible thing. "Tomorrow," he said, "at dawn, we start." He took her to the hills, a small, rocky draw a mile from the cabin, where a high wall of red rock served as a backstop. He set up a row of empty bean cans on a dead log. He was not a gentle teacher. He was, however, a patient one. He showed her how to stand, how to brace the stock against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, how to align the front blade with the rear notch. "You're a seamstress," he said, his voice clipped and impersonal. "You know how to thread a needle. This is the same. You are just pointing the needle." She tried. She hated it. She hated the smell of the gunpowder, the oily feel of the mechanism, the way it felt in her hands. She put the stock to her shoulder, aligned the sights, and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle kicked like a mule, slamming the brass butt plate into her shoulder, sending a shock of pain up her neck. She cried out, stumbling backward, dropping the gun in the dirt. Her ears rang. Her shoulder was already a deep, throbbing ache. The bean can sat on the log, untouched. I can't," she said, tears of pain and frustration stinging her eyes. "It hurts." "It's supposed to," Calder said, his face unmoved. He picked up the rifle, checked it for dirt, and handed it back to her. "It's a gun. It's not a sewing machine. Do it again." "Calder, please." "Brant won't care if you can't," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through her protest. "The men who come here, they won't care. They will raise their guns, and you will be dead. And you will have died because you were worried about a bruised shoulder. Now, pick it up." Something in his voice, a coldness that was not directed at her, but at the world, hardened her. She saw his logic. It was the brutal logic of this land. She was done running. She had to mean it. She picked up the rifle. She set her jaw, ignoring the throb. She put the stock back, bracing herself for the kick. "Don't pull the trigger," he said, his voice quiet again. "Squeeze it, gently, like you're crushing a berry. Let the explosion be a surprise." She squeezed. The gun roared. The can flew off the log. She stared, stunned. "Again," he said. They trained every day for a week. She learned to load. She learned to unjam. She learned to clean the weapon, her small, nimble fingers navigating the complex levers and springs. She learned the smell of hop solvent and gun oil. She was not a natural. She would never love it, but she was determined. Her hands, once made for creation, were now learning the tools of destruction. Calder watched her. He saw her wince every time she fired, but he also saw her reload. He saw her quiet, focused stubbornness. She was a woman who would rather be mending a shirt, but who would, if pushed, put a bullet in a man. He had seen that strength in her from the beginning, but now it had a focus. It surprised him, and it made his heart ache. The waiting began. The warrant was out. The town knew they were, in effect, besieged. They lived in the small cabin, their world reduced to the fence line Calder had built. Jedediah Smith returned a month after the warrant, his wagon laden with their winter supplies. He looked strained. He found Lena by the garden, pulling the last of the tough, stringy carrots. Calder was further out, mending the fence. "Mrs. Beckett," Jedediah said, his voice low, twisting his hat in his hands. I feel I gotta warn you." Lena stood, her hands dirty. "Warn me about what, Jedediah?" "The town, it's all riled up. That notice of Brant's, it's got folks seeing blood," he spat. "It ain't simple. Some folks, the church-going types, especially the women, they're saying you're a fallen woman, a harlot, that you're living in sin with a killer and you're no better than him." Lena's face paled, but she said nothing. Shame was an old, familiar coat. "But the other side," Jedediah hurried on. They pity you. They think he nodded toward Calder, "kidnapped you, or that you're his prisoner. They all know his reputation. They think he's forcing you. They see you as a victim, a poor widow trapped by the brother killer." "I am not his prisoner," Lena said, her voice cold. "I know that, ma'am, I can see it. But they can't." He took a step closer. "And that's the dangerous part. There's a plan. I heard Luke Haney and some others at the saloon. But it ain't just them. It's Deacon Miller. His wife's been whipping up the women. They're talking about riding out a rescue party." Lena's blood ran cold. A rescue? She knew what that meant. In the West, a rescue party was just a lynch mob with a holier name. They weren't coming to save her. They were coming to take her, and to do that, they would have to go through Calder. They were coming to kill her husband. "They're coming to save me from Calder," she clarified, her voice dead. "That's the shape of it," Jedediah said, miserable. "And they'll hang him for it, and they'll call it justice." "Thank you, Jedediah," she said. She picked up her basket of carrots. She was calm, a cold, quiet calm. When she told Calder, he did not rage, he did not curse. He simply nodded, his face impassive. That night, he boarded up the small window in the new room he had built for her. He reinforced the bar on the door with a new, heavier iron bracket. They were ready. The attack came 3 nights later. Lena woke first. It was not a sound that woke her, but a smell, acrid, sharp, smoke. "Calder," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Smoke." He was awake instantly. He was out of the bed, his trousers on, his rifle in his hand, before she had even sat up. He went to the window, peering out a crack in the shutter. "The barn," he said, his voice a low growl. Lena looked. A horrifying orange light was flickering against the new fence, their small barn. The shed where they kept the cow and the horses and their winter hay was burning. In the demonic, dancing light, she saw them. 3 masked men. They were holding torches. They had just thrown one onto the roof. "They're trying to burn us out," she whispered. "No," Calder said, his voice cold. "They're trying to draw me out." He cracked the door, just an inch. A rifle shot exploded from the darkness. The bullet tore through the plank, inches from his face, spraying the cabin with splinters. Lena screamed. "Get down," he roared. "Get my rifle, and stay away from the door." She scrambled to the pegs, her hands shaking, and grabbed the carbine. She fumbled, loading a cartridge into the chamber. Calder did not open the door again. He went to the window, smashed the glass with the butt of his rifle, and aimed through the shutter slat. He was calm. His breathing was steady. One of the men was trying to get to the horses, who were screaming in terror in the corral. Another was raising his rifle, aiming at the cabin window.
Calder fired.
The sound in the small cabin was concussive. The man in the yard screamed, a high, thin sound, and grabbed his leg, falling to the ground. Calder had not aimed to kill. He had aimed to stop.
Get him!
Another man yelled. He raised his own rifle, firing wildly at the cabin. Calder fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt at the man's feet.
Get off my land,
he roared, his voice the sound of the devil. It was enough. This was not the easy rescue they had planned. They had come to fight a monster, and they had found one. But he was not a monster to be trifled with. The two uninjured men panicked. They grabbed their wounded friend, dragging him by the arms. As they did, one of them, a lanky young man, stumbled. His burlap mask, poorly tied, slipped from his face. Lena, peeking from the other window, saw him clearly in the firelight.
My God, she whispered.
It's Thomas Miller. It's the deacon's son. They scrambled onto their horses, dragging the wounded man with them, and fled into the night. The barn was a lost cause. Calder and Lena worked with the water buckets, but they were not trying to save the structure. They were just trying to keep the flames from spreading to the dry grass, from reaching the cabin itself. The cow was lowing, terrified, and the horses had long since bolted, kicking down a section of the new fence. By dawn, the barn was a smoking black skeleton. The smell of burned hay and charred wood hung heavy in the air. They went back inside. The cabin was a mess of splinters and fear. Calder slumped at the table, the adrenaline leaving him. He looked gray and exhausted in the morning light. Lena saw the blood then. His thick homespun shirt was torn at the sleeve. A long, ugly gash ran down his forearm, oozing blood. A bullet graze, or a piece of flying debris from the splintered door. "You're hurt," she said, her voice flat. She got the water basin, the one she had cleaned his head wound in. She ripped a clean strip from her petticoat. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pour the whiskey onto the rag. He said nothing. He just watched her as she cleaned the wound. She was clumsy, her movements jerky. She was not crying, but her face was a mask of cold, white rage. They came to save me," she said, her voice trembling. "They came to save me, and they almost killed us. Deacon Miller's son, a child. They brought a child." She finished the bandage, pulling it tight. He put his other hand, the one not covered in soot, over hers. They sat in silence for a long time. The sun was up. The ruins of the barn smoked outside. The new day felt like an ending. "I brought this on you," Lena whispered, her eyes fixed on the black, smoking ruin. "Your barn, your land, they hate me, and now they hate you even more. I am your curse." Calder's hand tightened on hers. He did not look at the barn. He looked at her. "No," he said, his voice raw. "You brought me back from something worse." He meant it. Before her, he had been a ghost. He was just a man waiting to die, a man tending the grave of his own life. Now he had a fire to fight. He had a woman to protect. He had a home. His words, the simple, terrible truth of them, broke the last wall inside her. He had given her everything. He had taken her shame, her fear, and her name, and he had made them his own. He had taken a bullet graze for her. She owed him the one thing she had left, the last, ugliest piece of the truth. "Cal Calder," she said, her voice so low he had to lean in. I did not tell you the full truth about Brant." He waited. His eyes never left her face. "That day, after Elias, after he was killed, Brant came to my shop. He said he knew I was alone. He said he could protect me, that he would overlook my debts and the inquiry if I was agreeable." The old, ugly shame rose in her throat, choking her. "I told him to leave," she whispered, her eyes dropping to the table. He
He locked the door. He said he would own me, one way or another. He grabbed me. He tore my dress.
She was shaking now, but not from fear, from the memory.
I fought him. I hit him. I had my sewing scissors. I cut him on the hand. I cut him, and I ran. That was the assault. Me, defending myself. He tried to force himself on me. Calder. And when I fought him, he used his badge to destroy me.
The confession hung in the cabin. It was a putrid, foul thing, more toxic than the smoke outside. Calder's face changed. It had been weary and tender. Now, it went blank. It was a terrifying, cold blankness. It was the face of the man who had found her starving in the dust. It was the face of the man who had shot his brother. He said nothing. He stood up. The chair scraping on the floor was a violent sound.
"Calder?"
she asked, a new, sharp fear in her heart. He did not look at her. He walked to the door. He picked up his rifle, the one still leaning by the wall. He picked up his hat. He checked his gun belt, his hand moving with a slow, deliberate grace. "Calder, where are you going?" He opened the door. The bright, smoking daylight fell on him.
"Calder!"
she cried, standing up. He stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind him, and was gone. She heard his whistle, sharp and clear. She heard the sound of a horse, and then hoofbeats, fading, fast. He was gone. He was gone for 2 days. It was the worst 2 days of Lena's life. The silence of the ranch was deafening. She was alone, with the carbine, the smoking barn, and the new, terrible knowledge that her truth had finally driven him away. She did not know where he had gone. To Massilia, to kill Brant. Had he been arrested on the way? Was he lying dead in a ditch? Or had he, finally, simply run? Had her ugliness been the one thing his strength could not bear? She barricaded the door. She slept with the rifle. She tended the cow, which had returned, its eyes white with fear. She waited. He returned on the evening of the second day. She heard the horse first, a slow, tired walk. She went to the window, her heart in her throat, the rifle in her hands. It was him. He looked like a man who had been dragged by his own horse. He was covered in dust, his face stubbled and gray. He did not look like a killer. He looked broken. He slid from the saddle, his movements stiff, and stumbled toward the cabin. Lena pulled the bar and opened the door. He walked past her, slumping at the table. He looked as if he had not slept. He looked as if he had not eaten. He just sat there. "Where were you?" she whispered, her voice a mix of terror and relief. He did not answer. He reached into the pocket of his duster and pulled out a folded, dirty piece of paper. He dropped it on the table. Lena unfolded it. It was writing a statement. "I, Amos Pike, do hereby swear."
"Amos Pike," she said, confused. He was Brant's deputy, the young one. He quit right after Elias." "Read it,"
Calder rasped. She read. Her eyes scanned the cramped, nervous handwriting. It was a full confession. "I witnessed Deputy Marshal Brant strike the prisoner Elias Ward. I witnessed him make false reports concerning the prisoner's wife, Lena Ward. I heard him threaten her. I was there when she defended herself. He fabricated the charge of assault. He told me to keep my mouth shut, or I would be next. I am confessing this because I fear for my immortal soul." Lena looked up, her hand over her mouth.
He wrote this."
"He did," Calder said. He reached for the whiskey bottle, his hand shaking, and poured 2 fingers. "Where? How?" "He's been working a silver mine near Kingston," Calder said, his voice dead. "Took me a day to find him. Took me another day to convince him to write it." Lena looked at Calder's hands. His knuckles were split and bloody. "Kingston," she whispered.
That's 100 miles.
"More. He drank the whiskey. It didn't seem to touch him. He finally looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, but they were clear. They were filled with a terrible, cold fire. "I had to know," he said, his voice a low growl. "I had to know if there was a way to end this, without killing him. With the law." He tapped the paper. This is a chance. It's a small chance. We can take it to the federal marshal in Massilia. The real one, not Brandt." He stood up, unsteady on his feet. He walked to the hearth and stared into the cold embers. "But if not," he whispered, and the voice was not his. It was the voice of the man who had shot his brother. "If this does not work, if the law sides with him." He turned to her, and his face was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "I'm ready." The ride south to Massilia was a journey into a past Lena had buried. It was over 100 miles, and with every mile, the high, clear air of their ranch thinned, replaced by the choking, familiar dust of the valley. They rode for 3 days, their pace steady, their silence no longer a wall but a shared breath. Calder, his face set in grim lines, rode with his rifle in its scabbard, but his hand rarely strayed from the revolver on his hip. Lena carried the carbine, and on her lap, wrapped in oilcloth, was the confession of Amos Pike. They were no longer running. They were a reckoning. They arrived in Massilia in the late afternoon. The plaza was just as she remembered it, a dusty square of beaten earth, surrounded by low, thick-walled adobe buildings. The smell of chili, hot grease, and animals hung in the air. Nothing had changed, and everything had. As they rode toward the courthouse, a woman crossing the plaza with a basket of laundry stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared. It was Mrs. Alvarez, who had once bought lace from Lena. Her stare was not kind. Then a man, leaning against a post, recognized Calder. The whispers started instantly, a dry, rustling sound that followed them like tumbleweeds. "That's him, the brother killer. Beckett." "Sweet mother of God. Is that Lena Ward? Look at her, riding with him. Shameless." The words were barbs, but Lena kept her chin high. She looked straight ahead, her gaze fixed on the small, unassuming building that held the marshal's office. She had been a fugitive. Now she was a wife, and she was angry. Calder reined in his horse, his movements economical. He swung down, his duster settling, and tied the reins. He looked at the faces, the curious, the hostile, the frightened, and his expression was stone. He turned and, with a tenderness that defied the crowd, offered his hand to Lena. She took it and slid down, standing beside him. They were a stark pair. He, scarred and imposing, a man who looked like violence. She, pale and red-haired, her dress worn but clean, her quiet determination a strange contrast to his reputation. They did not look like prisoners. They looked like a judgment. They walked, side by side, up the 2 shallow steps and into the cool, shadowed interior of the courthouse. A deputy looked up from his desk, recognized them, and his hand immediately went to his gun. "That's far enough, Beckett." "We're not here for you," Calder said, his voice a low rumble that filled the small space. "We're here for Marshal Fairchild." "What's this?" A man stepped out of a back office. He was older, in his 50s, with a graying mustache and eyes that had seen too much. His badge was not a local deputy star. It was the eagle of a United States Marshal. This was the man Calder had been counting on. Before Fairchild could speak, another voice cut through the room. Well, if it isn't the prodigal whore." Joel Brandt stepped out from a side room, a cup of coffee in his hand. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes, small and dark, lit with a possessive, furious shock. He had not expected this. He had sent a warrant. He had not expected them to deliver themselves. He set his cup down, his smile a tight, cruel line.
And the murderer who's harboring her, Calder Beckett, you're a fool. You just saved me a long ride. He turned to his deputy. Cuff him. The deputy fumbled for his irons. Hold on, Fairchild said, his voice sharp. He looked at Calder. You're Calder Beckett. I am, Calder said. And this is my wife, Lena Beckett. She's a fugitive, Brant spat. Lena Ward, wanted for assault on an officer of the law. And you, he jabbed a finger at Calder, are wanted for harboring her. You're both under arrest. No, Lena said. It was the first word she had spoken, the single, quiet word cut through Brant's bluster. She stepped forward, past Calder, and held out the oilcloth-wrapped paper. We are not fugitives. Marshal Fairchild, we are here to file a report and to deliver this. Fairchild, his eyes curious, took the packet. Brant laughed, a short, ugly sound. What's that, a recipe? You have no standing here, woman. You are a criminal. That, Lena said, her voice clear, is the signed confession of your former deputy, Amos Pike. The color drained from Brant's face. He had built his power on the fear of men like Pike. He had never imagined one of them would find a conscience. It's a lie, Brant roared, his hand dropping to his gun. A forgery! That killer! He beat it out of him. It means nothing! Let me be the judge of that, Fairchild said, his eyes scanning the first few lines of the document. His expression hardened. You can't, Brant said, his voice rising, panicked. He's a murderer. He killed his own brother, and she's a whore. You're going to take their word over mine, over a decorated officer? By now, the noise had drawn the crowd. The doorway was packed. The plaza outside was filling with the same faces that had watched them ride in. They were here for the show. They were waiting to see the brother killer and the fugitive dragged to a cell. It's a setup, Brant shouted, playing to the crowd. They're trying to destroy me. Arrest them. He's right. Someone in the crowd yelled, He's the law! Marshal, Brant said, drawing his revolver and pointing it at Calder. I am placing this man under arrest. Stand aside. It was the breaking point. The standoff. Guns were drawn. The air was thick and hot. And Lena, who had hidden in wagons and cowered in storms, knew that the paper was not enough. The law was not just in the words. It was in the telling. She had to do what Calder, with his reputation. Could not. She had to speak. She stepped past Calder again, past the guns, and walked to the courthouse doorway, turning to face the plaza, to face the town that had buried her. You know me, she called out, her voice not loud, but carrying, shaking with a strength she did not know she possessed. I am Lena Ward. I was your neighbor. The crowd quieted. They stared. I am Lena Beckett now, she said. You shunned me. You whispered about me. You called me a harlot, and you did it because he... She turned, her arm outstretched, pointing directly at Joel Brant. Told you to. She's raving, Brant yelled, but he was sweating now. He told you I assaulted him? Lena continued, her voice rising, a cold, clear bell of anger. He told you I was a criminal. Do you want to know the truth? Do you want to know why? She took a breath, and the shame she had carried for so long, the ugly, secret shame, burned away, replaced by pure, hot fury. He came to my shop after my husband was dead. He came to a widow in her grief. He locked my door. He told me he would protect me. He told me I would be agreeable. A gasp went through the crowd. The women, their faces changed. They understood. They knew that word. He told me he would own me, Lena cried. He put his hands on me. He tore my dress. Lies, Brant shrieked. And Lena's voice dropped, deadly and cold. I took my sewing scissors, and I cut him. I fought for my honor, which was all I had left, and that good people of Mesilla. That was the assault. I refused to be his property. So he used his badge. He used his power. He used you to destroy my name."
The plaza was absolutely, tomb-like silent. They believed her. Her shame, now voiced, had become his. Lena turned back. She was trembling, exhausted, but she was not done. She looked at Marshal Fairchild. "Amos Pike's confession tells the same story," she said, her voice quiet again. "I did not flee justice. I fled him. I am not a fugitive. I am a victim, and my husband." She looked at Calder, and her eyes were shining with tears and a fierce, terrible love. "He is not a criminal. He is my protector. He is the only man who has ever been." She walked back to Calder's side. He put his arm around her, his hand gripping her shoulder, holding her up. Marshal Fairchild folded the confession. He looked at Brandt, his face a mask of cold, professional disgust. "Joel Brandt," Fairchild said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Given this statement and the sworn public testimony of Mrs. Beckett, I am suspending you pending a full federal inquiry." He held out his hand. "Your badge." "You can't," Brandt whispered. His whole world was collapsing. This is my town." "Your badge now." For a moment, Brandt looked like he would shoot. He looked at Fairchild, at Calder, at Lena. His eyes were the eyes of a trapped rat. With a strangled cry of rage, he ripped the badge from his vest and threw it at Fairchild's feet. It clattered on the dusty floor. You will regret this," he snarled. He pushed his way through the stunned crowd, a man unmanned, and stormed off down the street. The crowd broke apart, murmuring. The show was over. "Mrs. Beckett," Fairchild said, his voice softer. I am sorry for what you've endured. The warrants for you and for your husband are rescinded. You are free to go." "It's over," Lena whispered, slumping against Calder. "It's a start," Calder said, his voice still hard. He looked at Fairchild. "We'll be at the hotel. We ride out in the morning." That night, they were not free. They were targets. Brandt was a man who had lost everything, his badge, his pride, his power, and he had lost it all to a woman he could not own and a man he could not beat. They were in the stable behind the hotel. Long before dawn, the air was cold, smelling of hay and horse manure. Calder was checking the saddle on his dun. Lena was tying their meager supplies to the pack mule. The street was dark, the town asleep. "We'll be home in 2 days," Calder said, his voice quiet. He sounded almost peaceful. "I'm ready," Lena said, and she meant it. She was ready to leave this town forever. "But you ain't leaving." The voice came from the shadows of the stable entrance. Joel Brandt stepped into the weak lamplight. He was not in uniform. He was drunk. He smelled of whiskey and rage, and he was not alone. 2 men fanned out behind him. Hard-looking men Lena did not recognize. Hired guns. "You ruined me," Brandt slurred, his words thick. He was holding a sawed-off shotgun. "You and her, you took my town." Calder moved, his body instantly alert, pushing Lena behind him. "It's over. Brandt, you lost. Walk away." "I don't lose," Brandt hissed. He raised the shotgun. Calder was already moving. He did not go for his own gun. He dove, tackling Lena, pushing her behind a heavy water trough just as the stable exploded. The roar of the shotgun was deafening. Buckshot chewed the wooden wall where they had been standing. "Get his rifle!" Calder roared, shoving Lena toward their saddled horse. "Go!" He drew his own revolver and fired into the darkness. One of the hired men screamed and grabbed his gut, falling into the straw. The second man, a large, heavy man, was smarter. He had a knife. He lunged out of the darkness, tackling Calder. They went down. A confusion of limbs and curses.
wrestling in the dirt. Brant was up, holding his arm. Calder's shot had winged him. He roared in pain and fury. He saw the two men struggling on the ground. He leveled his shotgun, ready to fire into the melee, to kill them both. Lena had the carbine. She scrambled back, pulling it from the leather scabbard. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was cold and clear. She levered around. The man with the knife, he was on top of Calder. He had his arm free. The blade rose, glinting in the lantern light. He was going to stab her husband. She thought of Calder's voice in the hills. Squeeze, like you're crushing a berry. She was not in the hills. She was in a dark, foul-smelling stable, and she was not aiming at a can. She fired. The explosion was huge in the enclosed space. The man on top of Calder grunted, a sound of profound surprise, and went rigid. He slumped forward, dead, his own knife buried harmlessly in the dirt floor beside Calder's head. Calder shoved the body off, gasping, already reaching for his own dropped gun. "No!" Brant screamed. He saw what she had done. He turned his rage, his full, unholy rage, on her. He dropped the shotgun and pulled his revolver. He was going to kill her. But he had forgotten Calder. Calder, on the ground, threw the knife, the heavy Bowie knife, the one he'd used to skin deer, the one he'd sharpened at the table, flew, end over end, and struck Brant square in the thigh. Brant screamed, a high, thin sound, and grabbed his leg, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling. He stumbled, trying to stay upright, blood pouring from the wound. He was disarmed, wounded, and beaten. The stable doors crashed open. Marshal Fairchild, flanked by two deputies, stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn light. The gunfire had roused the town. "Drop it, Brant!" Fairchild yelled. Brant, bleeding from his arm, his leg, his pride, looked at them. He looked at Calder, getting to his feet, a dark stain spreading on his own shirt. In the melee, one of Brant's wild shots, or the first shotgun blast, had hit its mark. Calder had been shot, a deep, bloody tear in his left shoulder. He was pale, leaning against the stall, but he was standing. Brant was cornered. He saw the dead man. He saw Calder, wounded but alive. He saw Lena, standing, holding the smoking carbine. He had lost. He did not go quietly. He raised his one good arm, his hand empty, and pointed a bloody finger at Lena. "No woman!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "No woman bests me. You'll hang. You'll hang for this. You bitch! She killed him! She shot me! Arrest her!" "You're done, Joel," Fairchild said, disgusted. They grabbed him. He fought, but he was wounded and weak. They dragged him out, his boots scattering the straw, still screaming, a pathetic, broken man. The stable was suddenly, terribly quiet. The only sounds were the terrified nickering of the horses and the drip of blood. Lena dropped the rifle. The weight was too much. She ran to Calder. He was slumped against the stall, his face white, his hand clamped over his shoulder. Blood, dark and thick, was pouring between his fingers. "Calder, oh God, it's just the shoulder," he grunted, but his voice was thin. He was in shock. "It's clean." "Mr. Beckett." Marshal Fairchild was at his side, his voice respectful. "We need to get you to a doctor, now!" "No," Calder said. He pushed himself off the wall, leaning heavily on Lena. His legs were shaking. "No doctors, no towns." "Son," the marshal said, "you're in no condition to ride. You've lost a lot of blood. You need to rest. Here." Calder looked around the stable. He saw the dead man. He saw the blood in the straw. He looked through the open doors at the graying sky, at the lights of the town he had come to hate. He put his good arm around Lena's waist, pulling her close, using her for balance.
He started to walk, one painful, shuffling step at a time, toward their horses. "I've seen enough of towns," he said. The ride home was a slow agony. Calder, pale and slick with sweat, refused to stop. He rode, slumped in the saddle, his good arm braced on the pommel, his left arm bound tightly to his chest with a strip of Lena's torn petticoat. She had packed the wound with whiskey-soaked rags, but it was a deep, ugly tear, and the bleeding, while slowed, had not stopped. Lena rode beside him, her gaze fixed on his face, her carbine across her lap. She was no longer just his wife. She was his guard. Every snap of a twig, every shadow on the trail, made her hand tighten on the stock. She had killed a man. The knowledge sat heavy in her stomach, a cold, hard stone. She did not feel guilt. She did not feel pride. She felt only a grim, bone-deep certainty. She had done it to save him. She would do it again. When they finally crested the rise and saw their small cabin, the black, skeletal ruin of the barn beside it, Calder's strength gave out. He swayed in the saddle, his head dropping. "We're home," Lena whispered, her voice raw. He nodded, but he made no move to dismount. He did not have the strength. She slid from her horse, her own body screaming with exhaustion, and went to his side. "Calder, you have to let me help you." He looked down at her, his good eye hazy with pain. He had been her wall, her protector. It was a visible torment for him to be this weak. He grunted, and when he tried to swing his leg over, he almost fell. Lena caught him. She took his full weight, her knees buckling, and eased him to the ground. He was a large man, and the dead weight of him was immense. She half dragged, half carried him, his good arm slung over her shoulders, his boots dragging in the dust. The final 10 yards to the cabin. She got him inside, onto their pallet. He collapsed onto the quilt, his face as pale as bleached bone. Winter settled in. It came early that year, a hard, biting cold that sealed them inside the cabin. The wind howled around the stone corners, a constant, mournful sound, but inside there was warmth. Calder's wound was bad. The bullet had torn through the muscle of his shoulder, and in the first week, the fever set in. He became delirious, his mind lost in a red haze of pain and memory. He thrashed, his voice a low growl. Speaking to ghosts, he spoke to his brother, Silas, his words choked with anger and a grief so profound it made Lena's own heart ache. I tried to stop you. It wasn't right. The children—" Lena did not leave his side. She sat with him day and night. She boiled water, washing the wound with a frightening, desperate regularity. She forced broth between his cracked lips. She held him down when he thrashed, her small body pinning his one good arm, her voice a low, steady murmur. "You're safe, Calder. It's just me. It's Lena. You're home. You're safe." She was, in those long, dark weeks, his protector. She was his strength. She chopped wood with his axe, her hands blistering and splitting in the cold. She hauled the water, her back screaming in protest. She tended the animals, which had, one by one, returned to the ruined barn. Huddling for shelter, she sat by the window with the carbine, watching. But no one came. The world had forgotten them. He woke, truly, 3 weeks after their return. The fever broke in the dead of night. Lena, asleep in her chair, her head on his pallet by his hand, woke when his fingers, cool for the first time, brushed her hair. She looked up. His eyes were open. They were clear. "Lena," he rasped. His voice was a dry scratch. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in her eyes. You're back." "You stayed," he whispered. "I'm your wife," she said, as if that explained everything. His healing was slow. The man who had moved with such coiled grace was now humbled. He could not lift his left arm. He could not, at first, even dress himself. Lena had to do it. She had to wash him, shave him, feed him. And in this forced, physical intimacy, the last of their walls crumbled. There was no shame. He, who had been so terrified of his own touch, was now utterly dependent on hers. And she, who had been so afraid of his strength, now nurtured his weakness. She saw the man, not the reputation. She traced the old scars, the white, puckered lines of his past, as she bathed him, and she saw the new, red, angry scar on his shoulder as a mark of hers, a wound he had taken for her. He hated it. He hated his weakness. He would sit by the fire, his jaw tight, his hand clenching and unclenching, furious that he could not split wood, that he could not ride. "You need to rest," she would tell him, her voice firm. "I am a burden," he spat, his face turned to the fire. "Are you?" she said, sitting on the stool beside him. She took his good hand. It was rough, but it was clean. "I was a burden to you. You carried me, now I carry you. That is not a burden. Calder, I think that is what marriage is." He looked at her face, thinner now, her hands calloused and raw. He had married her for his land. He had stayed for his honor. He had fought for her. But she had saved him. As his strength returned, the silence in the cabin, once so heavy, became easy. They talked, not of their pasts. The past was a landscape of graves. They talked of the future. "The barn," he said one morning, looking out the window at the snow-covered wreckage. We need a barn. For the cow. For next winter." "Yes," she said. "It will. I cannot do it alone," he said, the admission tasting like ash. His left arm was still weak, the muscle stiff. "I know," she said, "neither can I." When the first thaw came, they began. The work was slow, it was painful, and it was grounding. They salvaged what they could. Charred beams, blackened but still strong. Stones from the foundation. They spent 2 days just clearing the wreckage, their hands and faces black with soot. Then they started to rebuild. Calder, with his one good arm, could only do so much. He showed Lena how. He taught her how to mix the daub, the mud and straw that would seal the cracks. He taught her how to measure, how to use the saw, his good hand guiding hers. She became his left hand. They worked in a quiet, steady rhythm. He would lift a post, his face tight with the strain, and she would be there, setting the stone, holding it steady. She would climb the low ladder, a thing he could not yet do, and hammer the roofing shingles, her movements awkward but determined. And they spoke. "My father," she said one afternoon, her mouth full of nails. He built our smokehouse. He said, 'God makes the wood, but a man makes the joint.'" He was always proud of his joints. Calder stopped, a piece of timber in his hand. He looked at her, perched on the roof, her hair a mess, a smudge of soot on her nose, and he smiled. It was not the softening of his mouth. It was a true smile. It lit his good eye, crinkled the scar on his cheek, and for a moment, he was not the brother killer. He was just a man. Lena's heart gave a lurch. She dropped the hammer. It clattered down the roof. She laughed, a free, easy sound. You smiled," she said, her voice full of wonder. His smile faded, but the warmth remained. We're burning daylight, Mrs. Beckett." But his voice was not rough. It was fond. Their intimacy, which had been born in desperation and fear, was reborn in this shared work. It was no longer a battle of desire and guilt. It was quiet. It was frequent. When they fell onto their pallet at night, exhausted, smelling of pine sawdust and sweat, he would pull her to him. He would kiss her, not with hunger, but with a deep, abiding, safe affection. He would hold her, his hand on her hair, and they would talk about the barn, about the garden, about the simple, solid things of the life they were building from the ashes. His guilt, her fear, they were still there. They were ghosts that lived in the corners, but they no longer had the power. They were just stories. Winter returned, closing its fist. But this time, it was different. The new barn stood, smaller than the first, but solid, built by their 4 hands. The cabin was warm. The animals were safe. It was Christmas Eve. A blizzard, thick and white, raged outside, insulating them from the world. A small fire crackled in the hearth. Lena was roasting a scrawny prairie chicken. It smelled of sage and peace. I have something," Calder said. He was, she realized, nervous. He was fumbling in the small wooden box where he kept his private things, his father's watch, his brother's first medal. "Calder?" He pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He held it out to her. She unwrapped it. Inside were 2 hair combs. They were carved from a dark, smooth piece of mountain mahogany. They were carved in the shape of wildflowers, the high desert columbine. The work was intricate, careful, beautiful. "Calder," she whispered. She touched the smooth wood. He had made these in the long nights, after she was asleep. He had sat by the fire, his knife in his good hand, slowly, painfully, carving this for her. I'm not skilled," he mumbled, his face turned away. It's just wood." They're beautiful," she said, her voice thick. She took the pins from her hair, letting it fall, and then, her hands trembling, she fixed her hair, the red strands coiling, using his combs. "Now, you," she said, wiping her eyes. She went to her own small box, the one she had brought from Messilia. She pulled out a small, book-like object. It was bound in a piece of soft, blue calico, the last piece of her best dress, the one she'd worn when she married Elias. She had stitched it herself. It was a journal. He took it. He opened the cover. The pages were rough-cut paper, salvaged from old flour sacks, boiled and pressed. The first page was not blank. In her neat, careful hand, she had written, "This is the life we made." He read the words. He looked at her. He, a man of so few words, who had been defined by a past he could not speak of, was now holding a book of their future. He did not say anything. He just held it. He put his good hand on her face, his thumb tracing the comb in her hair, and he pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of all the words he did not have. The spring came, and with it, life. The snow melted, the creek ran high, and the world turned a fragile, hopeful green. Lena had been tired. She had been dizzy in the mornings. She had thought it was just the winter, the hard work. But one morning, in late spring, the world tilted, and she knew. She was standing by the new barn, breathing in the scent of warm pine and damp earth. She put her hand on her belly. It was flat, but it was not empty. A life, a new life. Not a ghost, not a memory, but a future. A child, his child. She felt a wave of joy so fierce it was terrifying. And then, the fear. This world, this hard, brutal land, the blood in the stable, the ghosts. Could they bring a child into this? Calder found her there, her hand on her stomach, her face pale. "Lena?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. Are you ill?" She looked at him, her husband, the man who had been her monster, her wall, her shame, and her salvation. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. I am with child." He froze. His face went blank. It was the same blankness she had seen when she told him of Brant, the blankness of profound, soul-deep shock. He did not speak. He did not move. He just stared. Lena's heart sank. He did not want this. He was a man of death. His past, his brother, the children. "Calder?" she whispered, her joy turning to ash. He still said nothing. He just looked at her, his good eye wide, searching her face. Then he looked down, at her hand, at her belly. He took a step, then another. He did not stop until he was in front of her. He did not touch her belly. He did not kiss her. He wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her so tight against his chest she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body shaking. He was not angry. He was terrified. He held her, just held her, for a long, long moment, his heart hammering against her. And then he spoke, his voice a broken, desperate, fierce rasp against her ear. "You're safe." He said it again. "You're safe." He pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. His eyes were full of a raw, protective fire she had never seen, not even in the stable. He looked at her, and then down at her stomach. "You're safe," he whispered, a promise, a vow. "You're safe, you're safe." The land was hard. The world was still cruel, but they were not. They were riding the fence line. It was late summer. The hills were a pale, sun-baked gold, the sky a high, aching blue. Calder sat his horse, his left arm, still stiff but strong again, resting on the pommel. Lena sat her own horse, her body full and round with the new life inside her. Calder reined in, looking out over the valley, their valley. He turned to her, his mouth softening in the way she now knew was his smile. He reached over, his hand, large and scarred, covering hers where it rested on her belly. The wind blew, carrying the scent of sage and pine. They sat, two people, alone, against the vast, unforgiving, beautiful land. Lena looked at this man, her husband, this killer, this father. She had come here, a hunted, broken thing, looking for a wall to hide behind. She had married him for protection. "But I stayed," she thought, her hand moving under his, feeling the kick of the new life they had made from the ashes. "I stayed, for the love that made me brave enough to face the world again." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We've come a long way with Lena and Calder. I hope their journey touched you. I would love to know your thoughts on the story. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from, and share what you felt in English. And if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories from the hard, true, and beautiful American frontier.